Okay, class, we're going to continue on with our last of the Cinderella stories in our Elements of Fiction unit. So in our first Cinderella, we listened to a traditional tale. Our second Cinderella was from what country?
Mexico!
Mexico. And our third Cinderella came from what country?
Persia!
Persia. Excellent. So moving on to our last Cinderella story, we're going to hear the story of the Egyptian Cinderella. Egypt is on what continent?
Africa!
Africa, excellent. So if we look over at the globe here, we see Africa. And right up here in the corner, this is Egypt. So this is where our story is taking place. The story of the Egyptian Cinderella is by Shirley Climo. Keep in mind the elements of fiction. We're going to do the same thing with this story as we did with the previous three. So you need the protagonists, the heroes, and the antagonists, kind of the bad guys. The main conflict of the story, as well as the elements that lead up to the climax. And we're going to discuss that after we're gone. So this is The Egyptian Cinderella by Shirley Climo. Long ago in the land of Egypt, there was where the green river meets the blue sea. There was a maiden named Rhodopes. Now when Rhodopes was small, she lived in Greece, but pirates kidnapped her and sold her as a slave to Egypt. Like other Egyptian servants, Rhodopes went to the water's edge to wash clothes or gather reeds. But Rhodopes looked different than the other servant girls. Her eyes were green, whereas their eyes were brown. Their hair was dark and straight, where her hair blew and tangled in the wind. Their skin was the color of copper, but hers was pale and burned under the hot sun. This is where her nickname came from, for Rhodopes meant rosy in Greek. Rosy Rhodopes, the servant girls would hiss, but she had to ignore them and continue on with their chores. Rhodopes' master was kind, but he was old and often fell asleep beneath the fig tree, so he never heard the other girls teasing Rhodopes. Rhodopes, mend my robes. Rhodopes, go bake some bread. I'm hungry. Rhodopes, go get the geese out of the garden. They're eating the onions. And Rhodopes always did it, for they were household servants, and she was only a slave. Rhodopes did have many friends, and the animals, though. The birds in the sky ate out of her hand. The monkey would sit on the shoulder, and the hippo loved to hear her song. After her chores were done, Rhodopes would dance lightly on her feet, twirling. One day, the master woke up and saw her dancing. No goddess is more beautiful, more nimble on her feet. This is worthy of a gift. He thought about it. Rhodopes, you shall be barefoot no longer. I shall make you a gift of slippers. And so he bought her a pair of beautiful rose-red slippers. They fit her feet perfectly, and when she danced, the rose-red slippers sparkled like fireflies. This set Rhodopes apart from the other Egyptian girls even more, so they kept her more busy with chores out of jealousy, and she was less able to dance. One day, the chief servant Kippa said, "Tomorrow we shall sail for the city of Memphis, for Pharaoh is going to hold court. There will be dancing and music. But not for you, Rhodopes, for you have chores to do. You need to wash the clothes and weed the garden and grind the grain." Next morning, the servant girls took off for Memphis. Rhodopes followed them to the edge of the river, hoping they would look back and invite her along, but they never did. Rhodopes sighed. I guess I have to wash the linen and weed the garden and grind the grain. Hippo saw her and splashed into the riverbed next to her, splashing mud on her beautiful rose-red slippers. "Shame, Hippo!" cried Rhodopes. "You got mud on my beautiful rose-red slippers." So she took her robe, cleaned them off, and set them on the side of the riverbank. Just then a great shadow came across, and she saw a falcon flying through the sky, for falcon is a symbol of the god Horus. "Greetings, proud Horus," said Rhodopes, and she bowed her head. As she bowed, the falcon came by, picked up a rose-red slipper, and flew off. "No!" cried Rhodopes. "Horus, no! Please bring back my rose-red slipper." But the falcon flew on, along with the rose-red slipper. "Oh, now I have only one rose-red slipper. I will look foolish if I try to dance or walk." So she tucked her last rose-red slipper into her robes and went away. Falcon flew with the rose-red slipper and followed the Nile to the city of Memphis, where there was Pharaoh. Pharaoh's name was Amasis, and he sat on his throne wearing the red and white crown of Egypt. Now Pharaoh Amasis preferred to ride chariots as fast as the wind than to sit on his throne and hold court. As Horus the falcon flew through, he dropped the rose-red slipper into the lap of Amasis. "The god Horus sends me a sign," said Pharaoh Amasis, "for this is a beautiful rose-red slipper. Every maiden in my kingdom will try on the rose-red slipper, and the maiden that it fits shall be my queen." He dismissed the court and decided to begin his search for the owner of the rose-red slipper. The Egyptian servant girls arrived to Memphis and saw that it was empty, so they had to go home. Angry that they missed Pharaoh, they didn't even notice that Rhodopes had only one rose-red slipper. Pharaoh searched every city in distant lands, women and girls, rich and poor, but no one could fit into the rose-red slipper. The longer Amasis searched, the more determined he began to find his queen. His barge finally came down the Nile to the area that Rhodopes lived. Trumpets blaring, this scared Rhodopes, so she went to hide in the reeds. The servant girls were excited to see Pharaoh coming, but when they saw him clutching the rose-red slipper, they clapped their hands over their mouths. For they knew who that slipper belonged to, but they did not say it. Each girl tried on the rose-red slipper, but none could make it fit. "Enough," said Amasis. "I will never find my queen." But then he spied a girl in the reeds. It was Rhodopes. "Come, try on this rose-red slipper." So he slid it, and it fit beautifully upon her foot. Not only that, but she was able to produce the other rose-red slipper. "Behold your queen," said Pharaoh. "But," said Kippa and the other servant girls, "she's not even Egyptian."